If someone had told me years ago that I would spend 2 months in a nursing home, I would have laughed. Not yet. I would have said, not me. We all believe we have time to chase our dreams, time to make amends, time to start truly living. But time is not something we own. It is something we borrow, and one day it runs out. Life does not wait for us to be ready. It does not pause for us to make perfect plans. It moves forward as the Buddha taught, like a river, sometimes gentle, sometimes relentless, but always flowing toward the inevitable truth of impermanence. I entered that nursing home thinking it was just a temporary stop, a place where I would rest and recover before returning to the life I knew. But I was wrong. Those 2 months were not just about healing my body. They were about awakening my soul. They became a meditation on what truly matters, a mirror reflecting truths I had long ignored. I met people who had been there for decades. Some had family who visited often, surrounding them with love. Others sat in silence, forgotten by the world, left behind like footprints on a shoreline, slowly fading with each passing tide. And as I listened to their stories of love, loss, regret, and redemption, I saw 2 paths ahead, one of peace and one of sorrow. And I asked myself, when my time comes, which road will I walk? Aging, I realized, is not about how many birthdays we have left. It is about how we choose to spend the time that remains. It is about the choices we make now, the relationships we nurture, the forgiveness we grant, the gratitude we embrace. It is about whether we leave this world with our hearts full or with the aching whisper of "I wish I had more time." So I invite you to take this journey with me. These are the 7 lessons I learned, lessons rooted in Buddhist wisdom, lessons that might just change the way you see your own life. Lesson 1. Loneliness is the greatest suffering. In Buddhist thought, suffering, dukkha, is the fundamental truth of life. And of all the sufferings I witnessed, loneliness was the deepest. There was a man, perhaps in his late 80s, who had spent his life building an empire, accumulating wealth, securing his future. But when I asked him about his family, his face darkened. "I built a business," he said. "But I never built a family, and now I have everything I worked for, but no one to share it with." His voice, though steady, carried the weight of something unspoken, an emptiness that no amount of success could fill. I saw it in his eyes, the way they lingered on the past, the silent longing for a second chance that would never come. He had spent his years chasing ambitions, believing that financial security would be enough. But in the twilight of his life, he realized that the true currency of happiness had nothing to do with bank accounts. It was measured in love, in shared laughter, in the warmth of companionship, and he had none left. In Buddhist teachings, attachment to material success without cultivating meaningful relationships leads to suffering. This man was a living testament to that truth. He had climbed the mountain of achievement, only to stand at the summit alone. Then there was the woman by the window. Every morning she took her place, her frail hands folded in her lap, eyes scanning the road outside. "Maybe today," she whispered. "Maybe today my son will visit." But he never did. I watched her for weeks. Rain or shine, she sat there, unwavering in her hope. At first I thought she was simply waiting, but the more I observed, the more I understood. She was not just waiting for her son, she was waiting to matter again. Her longing reminded me of an old Buddhist parable. A man spends his life planting seeds of attachment, but when the season of harvest comes, he finds himself alone in an empty field. She had poured her love into her son, had made sacrifices, had given all of herself, but life had pulled him in another direction. And in the quiet of that room, I saw the profound ache of waiting for someone who may never return. And yet there was another layer to her pain, one far deeper than simply being forgotten. It was the awareness that she still remembered, that she still loved, that she still cared, even when the world had moved on. There is a peculiar sorrow in that kind of devotion, one that lingers in the spaces between hope and heartbreak. I recall a moment when a nurse placed a phone in her hands, offering her the chance to call him. She hesitated. "What if he's too busy?" she murmured. "What if I am just another obligation to him now?" That hesitation spoke volumes. Sometimes the greatest pain is not in being abandoned. It is in realizing that the people we love no longer feel the same urgency to hold on to us as we do to them. What seeds are you planting today? Are you nurturing connections? Or are you allowing time to slip away in the pursuit of things that will not hold your hand in the end? Are you making time for the ones who love you? Or are you letting life's distractions convince you that there will always be another day? Because one day, you may find yourself sitting in a quiet room, waiting for someone to do the same. Buddhism teaches us the impermanence of all things, relationships included. Love, when neglected, fades like mist in the morning sun. But the love we nurture, the time we give, the bonds we strengthen, those become the only riches that truly matter in the end. If there is someone in your life you have not spoken to in a while, reach out today, not tomorrow, not next week, because love, like time, is fleeting, and once it slips through our fingers, we can never get it back. Lesson 2. Health is more valuable than wealth. There was a man who had once owned everything: a successful business, luxurious vacations, fine suits. But now he sat in a wheelchair, unable to lift a spoon to his mouth. "I spent my life chasing money," he told me. "But what is freedom if you don't have the strength to enjoy it?" His words lingered in the air, heavy with the weight of realization. He had spent decades sacrificing sleep, skipping meals, and ignoring his body's warnings, all in the name of success. "I used to think exhaustion was a badge of honor," he confessed, "that pushing through pain meant I was strong. But now my body has given up before my spirit was ready." The Buddha taught that our body is a vehicle, a temple, and a tool for awakening. Yet, so many of us treat it as an afterthought, pushing it to the limits for success, ignoring its needs, believing we have endless time. But time, as I saw in that nursing home, is not a patient teacher. One woman, once an avid traveler, told me, "I always said I'd go back to Italy when I retired. I dreamed of walking through the streets of Rome, seeing the Sistine Chapel with my own eyes. But by the time I had the money and the time, my legs could no longer carry me." Her words stung because they carried a truth so many of us ignore. We assume our bodies will always be there, ready to serve us when we finally slow down enough to enjoy life. But the reality is different. The body, much like time, is fleeting. It does not wait for our schedules to clear or our bank accounts to fill. In another corner of the nursing home, I met an elderly man who had once been a passionate dancer. "I used to glide across the floor like I was weightless," he said, his eyes twinkling with nostalgia. "Now I struggle to stand without help." I asked him what he would do differently if he had the chance. He smiled sadly and said, "I would have danced more. I would have stretched every morning, treated my body like a partner instead of a servant. But I always thought there was more time." How many of us live this way? We treat our bodies as machines, forcing them to endure endless stress, late nights, unhealthy habits, all for the sake of a future where we imagine we'll finally take care of ourselves. But what if that future never comes? I saw it too many times in that place. People who once had strength now confined to beds. Those who once took their health for granted now paying the price in ways they never expected. Regret is a bitter medicine, and I saw many who had to swallow it daily. Buddhism teaches us about mindfulness, not just of the mind but of the body, The body is a sacred vessel, yet we often ignore its cries for rest, nourishment and care. We listen to our ambitions louder than we listen to our own pulse. And by the time we realize what we have done, it is often too late to undo it. How are you treating your body today? Are you listening to it, nourishing it, honoring it? Or are you treating it like a machine to be used and discarded? When was the last time you truly cared for it? Not out of vanity, but out of gratitude. Take care now while you still can. Because when the body begins to fail, no amount of wealth, no postponed vacation, no long-awaited dream can turn back the clock. The only thing you will have left is the way you treated yourself along the way. Lesson 3. Material things lose their meaning. In the nursing home, no one talked about their cars, their designer clothes, or their bank accounts. The only things that mattered were the memories, the laughter, the shared meals, the love given and received. One afternoon, I met a man named Richard, who had once lived in a mansion overlooking the ocean. He had spent his life collecting things, art, expensive watches, luxury cars. Now in the nursing home, all that remained of his wealth fit into a single drawer beside his bed. "I spent my life filling my house with things," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "But in the end, all that mattered were the moments." He pulled out a small, worn photograph from his drawer. It was an old picture of him and his wife, taken decades ago during a vacation in Greece. "This," he said, tapping the image gently, "is worth more to me now than all the cars I ever owned." His words echoed the Buddhist teaching of impermanence, anicca. Everything we accumulate, everything we strive to possess, will one day slip through our fingers like sand. The question is, what will remain when it does? In another room, I met Margaret. She had never been wealthy by society's standards. She had lived in a modest home, raised 3 children, and worked as a school teacher for most of her life. She had never owned extravagant things, but when she spoke, there was no trace of regret in her voice. "I don't miss what I never had," she told me, "but I cherish every moment I spent with my family, every meal we shared, every story we laughed over. That's my treasure. And you know what? That's enough." There was a peace in Margaret that I rarely saw in those who had spent their lives chasing wealth. She had understood, long before many of us do, that material things are fleeting. The richness of life is found in love, in presence, in the connections we nurture. And as I listened to her, I realized something. We are not remembered for what we owned, but for how we made others feel. A Buddhist parable tells the story of a wealthy merchant who, on his deathbed, realized that he had spent his life acquiring possessions, but had never cultivated generosity. As he prepared for the next life, he lamented, "I built a grand house, but I never built a home. I filled my hands, but I left my heart empty." I thought about this as I walked through the hallways of the nursing home. So many people had once owned more than they could ever need, but now in their final chapter, their wealth had no power to comfort them. The soft touch of a friend's hand, the sound of a familiar voice, the simple joy of sharing a meal, those were the only riches that still held meaning. Are you collecting possessions or moments? Are you filling your life with things or with meaning? Are you investing in what will last beyond your lifetime? Or are you chasing what will fade? When the final day comes, it is not what you owned that will define your life, but how you loved, how you lived, and the kindness you left behind. Choose wisely, because one day, all that will remain is the legacy of your heart, not the weight of your wallet. Lesson 4. Forgiveness brings peace. One woman carried a burden heavier than her years. She had not spoken to her sister in over 2 decades over something neither of them could even fully remember. "I thought we had more time," she said. But one day never came. Her voice trembled as she spoke. her hands resting on her lap, fingers absent-mindedly tracing the pattern of the fabric. There was a sadness in her eyes, not just from missing her sister, but from the realization that all the anger she had held onto had only hurt herself. I used to tell myself that she should be the one to call first, that she should apologize, she continued. But now I would give anything just to hear her voice again. The Buddha taught that holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. I had heard this teaching before, but never had I seen it so vividly illustrated as in the lines on this woman's face. The deep creases of regret, the weariness of carrying a grudge for far too long. I remember meeting another man in the nursing home, George. He was in his late 80s, frail but sharp-minded. One evening, he shared with me a story from his youth. He had a falling out with his best friend over a business dispute. We were like brothers, he said, shaking his head. But we let money come between us. We said words we couldn't take back. And then life happened. We went our separate ways, too stubborn to admit we missed each other. Years passed, then decades. George had built a life, had a family, but in the quiet moments, his mind always wandered back to his old friend. One day, I finally decided to reach out. He continued, his voice softer now, but by then it was too late. He had passed away, and all the anger, all the resentment, it meant nothing. I had spent all those years holding on to something that only hurt me. He looked at me then, his eyes searching. Do you have someone you need to forgive? Don't wait, he said. You think you have time until you don't. His words stayed with me long after our conversation ended. I thought of my own grudges, the walls I had built, the apologies I had never given, and I saw them for what they truly were. Weights, keeping me anchored in suffering. I recalled a Buddhist teaching about two monks who came across a woman struggling to cross a river. One monk hesitated, knowing their vows prohibited them from touching a woman, but the other simply lifted her onto his back, carried her across, and set her down. Hours later, as they continued their journey, the first monk finally blurted out, "How could you do that? We are not supposed to touch women." The other monk smiled and said, "I set her down hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" How many of us are still carrying burdens that should have been set down long ago? How many sleepless nights have we spent replaying arguments, clinging to old wounds, convincing ourselves that we were right, that they were wrong? But in the end, does it even matter? Forgiveness is not about saying that what happened was okay. It is not about excusing someone's behavior. It is about freeing yourself from the chains of bitterness, about reclaiming your own peace. Because while we hold on to anger, the only person we truly imprison is ourselves. Who do you need to forgive? Yourself? Someone else? What weight have you been carrying that no longer serves you? Release the coal before it burns you any longer. Make the call. Write the letter. Let go. Because in the end, peace is worth far more than pride. Lesson 5. Every day is a gift. Don't waste it. One morning, a man who had been laughing with us at dinner was gone. Just like that. And it struck me, we live as if we have all the time in the world. We say, one day, I will travel. One day, I will tell them I love them. One day, I will truly start living. But then one day never comes. His name was Robert, and he was 82 years old. The night before, he had told us stories about his childhood, about climbing trees, skipping stones across the lake, and the first time he had ever danced with his wife. He had a way of making the past feel alive, as if we were right there with him, standing in the summer sun of a memory. I always thought I had time, he had said, swirling his cup of tea. Time to take my wife to Paris like I promised. Time to fix the fence in the backyard. Time to call my brother and tell him I was sorry. But time had run out, and all those things, those beautiful, hopeful, one-day things died with him. Buddhism teaches us to live in the present, to awaken to the now, because now is all we truly have. Yet most of us live like we have an infinite supply of tomorrows, like we can afford to postpone happiness, forgiveness, adventure, and love until some undefined future date. But the truth is, life does not wait. It does not pause for us to be ready. It moves forward, with or without our permission. I met a woman named Eleanor, who had spent her entire life waiting. I always wanted to write a book, she told me. I had the idea in my head for years. But first, I had work, then kids, then grandkids. And I kept telling myself, someday, when life slows down, I'll finally write it. She sighed, looking down at her trembling hands. But life never slowed down, and now my hands shake too much to hold a pen. I could see the regret in her eyes, the weight of all the moments she had let slip away, believing there would always be more. There is an old Zen proverb that says, when you walk, just walk. When you eat, just eat. It reminds us that life is happening right now, not tomorrow, not someday, but in this very moment. And yet, how often do we let the moment pass us by, lost in worries about the future or memories of the past? I once heard a monk compare life to a candle burning in the wind. It flickers, it dances, it glows, but at any moment, a strong breeze could come and extinguish it. We do not get to choose how long our candle will burn, but we do get to choose how brightly it shines while it's still lit. If you love someone, tell them today. If you have a dream, take the first step now. If there is something you've been putting off, an apology, a phone call, a long overdue adventure, do it. Not tomorrow, not someday, now, because tomorrow is never promised. And one day, when you look back, you will want to know that you truly lived, not just existed. Lesson 6. The power of gratitude. There was an elderly woman named Alice who sat in a wheelchair by the garden every morning, her face turned toward the sun, her hands resting gently on her lap. Unlike many others in the nursing home, she never complained. She never spoke of regrets, nor did she dwell on what she had lost. Instead, she greeted each new day with a quiet sense of gratitude. One day, I asked her, "How do you stay so content, even after all you've been through?" She smiled softly and said, "Because I choose to see what I have, not what I've lost. I wake up, and I am grateful. I can still see the trees swaying in the wind. I can still feel the warmth of the sun on my skin. I can still hear the laughter of the nurses down the hall. That's enough for me." Her words struck me. In a world that constantly tells us to chase more, to seek what we lack, Alice had found peace in appreciating what was already there. Buddhism teaches us that suffering often comes from craving, tanha, the insatiable desire for what we do not have. But contentment, santosha, arises when we shift our focus from lack to abundance, from what is missing to what remains. I met another man, James, who had once been an accomplished pianist. Arthritis had taken his ability to play, and at first the loss devastated him. "I used to ask, 'Why me?'" he admitted. "But one day, I decided to stop mourning what I had lost and start appreciating what I still had. I may not be able to play anymore, but I can still listen to music. I can still feel its rhythm, its emotion, and for that, I am grateful." Both Alice and James had found a profound truth. Life will always take things away from us. Our bodies will weaken, our circumstances will change, and one day we will lose everything. But we still have the present moment, and there is always something to be grateful for. if we choose to see it. What are you focusing on? The things you lack, or the blessings you still have? If you woke up tomorrow with only the things you were grateful for today, what would remain? Start noticing. Start appreciating. Because gratitude is not just about saying thank you, it is about truly living in appreciation of the life you have right now. Lesson 7. Love is the only legacy that matters. In the end, all that remains is love, not the wealth we built, not the possessions we accumulated, not the titles we earned, just love, how deeply we loved, how freely we gave, and how many hearts we touched along the way. I met a woman named Margaret, who had been in the nursing home for nearly a decade. Her body was frail, but her spirit was luminous. Every afternoon she received visitors, her children, her grandchildren, even old students she had once taught. They brought flowers, held her hands, and filled the room with laughter and warmth. She was not the richest resident there. She did not have an impressive resume or a long list of worldly accomplishments, but she had built a life overflowing with love, and in her final years she was surrounded by it. Then there were others, people who had spent their lives chasing success, but had no one left to sit by their bedside. Their wealth could buy them the best medical care, but it could not buy them the presence of a loved one. The Buddha once said, "If you knew what I know about the power of giving, you would not let a single meal pass without sharing it." Love is like that. The more we give, the more it multiplies. The more we hoard it, the more it slips through our fingers. I remember a man named Henry, who had spent his life focused on work. I thought providing for my family meant working hard, making money, he told me. But I missed birthdays. I missed anniversaries. I missed the small moments that mattered most. And now I realize they would have preferred fewer things and more of me. That is the final lesson. We do not take anything with us when we go. Not our money, not our possessions. The only thing that remains is the love we gave and the lives we touched. If today were your last day, what would you be remembered for? Would it be the things you owned, or the way you made people feel? Would your absence leave behind echoes of love, or would the world simply move on without a trace? Love now, give now, show up now, because in the end, love is the only thing that truly lasts. Closing live fully, love deeply and let go of regret. 2 months in a nursing home changed me. It was not just a lesson in aging, it was a lesson in living. I saw people whose eyes sparkled with peace because they had loved deeply, forgiven freely, and embraced each moment with gratitude. I also saw those who carried the weight of unspoken words, missed opportunities, and regrets that could never be undone. Aging is not about counting the years left. It is about making the most of the ones we still have. It is about choosing presence over distraction, love over resentment, gratitude over longing. It is about realizing that life is not something that happens in the distant future. It is happening now, in this very moment, in the breath you are taking as you listen to these words. So, I ask you, when you reach the final chapter, will you look back with peace, or will you whisper, "I wish I had more time"? Because time is a guest that does not overstay. It visits, it teaches, and then it leaves. We do not get to ask for more. We only get to decide how we spend what we are given. Let today be the day you start living as if it matters. Let today be the day you forgive, not for them, but for yourself. Let today be the day you call someone you love, just to say, "I'm thinking of you." Let today be the day you choose joy, choose kindness, choose to be present for your own life. Because in the end, life is not measured in years, it is measured in moments. Make them count. If this message resonated with you, if you found even a spark of wisdom in these words, consider subscribing to this channel. Here we share reflections, stories and teachings that remind us of what truly matters. Let's walk this journey of wisdom together. And if this video spoke to your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it, because sometimes a single moment of insight can change a life. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And most of all, thank you for choosing to live with intention, starting now.